looked at predictions of the way global temperatures will increase, and from the present they found out there are many different models giving somewhat different results, but they all go in one direction. And so the urgency is not entirely established.
Okay. Are there any governments in the world? I mean, we know in the past, certainly it's been reported in a small scale that countries like China, even as recently as the Olympics, and the Soviet Union have experimented with things that will actually change the climate temporarily. Do we know if there are any national governments that are currently pursuing an active program of geoengineering research?
In the free world, research sponsorship is done by agencies which are not closely tied to governments, and certainly there are such projects in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere.
And what about, I won't say the unfree world, I don't want to have a diplomatic incident, but what about those countries that are not subject to the same sort of rigour and democratic scrutiny like Russia and China? Do we know anything about, because surely they're going to be as affected by the issues of global warming as anybody else?
Oh, indeed, yes. I know that China is doing a lot of work on essentially trying to decarbonize society. It's investing a lot of money there, but I don't know what it's doing in the area of geoengineering.
And perhaps, Dr. Lunt, can I come to you? I mean, our own government, both DIAS and DEFRA, have indicated in their submissions to us that geoengineering technologies may play a role in future efforts. Are you aware of that being anything more than just a sort of pious hope, or is in fact anything going on in government that might give you and your colleagues some comfort?
I'm not aware of any major sort of projects that are planned in terms of geoengineering. I did notice in one of the written evidence that from the RC UK, the Research Councils UK, that they are, one of the things that they're considering, it said, was a geoengineering ideas factory. But I don't know any more than just having seen that.
Okay. I mean, I asked that question because, I mean, the history of science is, so far as I can see, never just a question of top-down, and certainly never just a question of bottom-up. It's a question of an interrelationship between those two things. And isn't it the case that if you expect to get your ideas seriously on the public agenda, that those people who are in support of geoengineering research have got to put their head above the parapet a bit more, got to get things out more into the public arena and get a major public debate going? I mean, Professor Launder, is there any evidence that you've got that critical mass to do that?
I would say that the critical mass has been reached. The fact that this committee is inquiring into it is some signal. The Royal Society took upon itself to publish a special issue of the Philosophical Transactions devoted to this subject. The Royal Society is currently developing independently of that a position on geoengineering. It will be producing a paper, I believe, next year on this.
So how are people in this area communicating all of this with policymakers? I mean, we had Sir John Beddington before us recently. I mean, what are you doing to get the ear of people like him in government?
I have to say I don't know, but I'm sure. I'm sure
you
that
you see the point that I'm making. You know, I mean, you're coming along here today, both of you, with saying, you know, this is in its infancy, but we've got some interesting ideas to be taken forward. And unless you are able to create that critical mass of involvement and to grab the ear of policymakers, and then you're not going to get very far, are you?
Well, policy influences on governments tend to be made through scientific groups. There's the Royal Academy of Engineering is pressing in that direction through its president. The Royal Society is pressing for progress in that direction. I know the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, to which I belong, is very active in that.
So you think we're going to have relatively soon a critical mass of evidence and arguments that government departments like DEFRA and DIAS will have to take notice of?
Well, partly I would say we haven't got all the evidence, but we cannot afford to wait. We must get involved in field trials and experiments that will enable us to discriminate between the techniques that don't really work as effectively as others.
Okay, well, Dr. Santillo, if I can just come to you finally. I mean, what Professor Launders just said, does that not sound to you like a reasonable basis on which to proceed? I mean, some might say, I mean, I've read the evidence submission that you've made, and I've heard what you've said today. Some might say that your ideas would have been regarded 20 or 30 years ago as fairly off the wall. So why are you actually today being so down on geoengineers? Is it perhaps because you were the new orthodoxy?
Well, I think if any of our ideas were considered to be off the wall 20 or 30 years ago, they're certainly not now.
But that's exactly the point that I'm making.
Well, but perhaps we shall need to see where some of this research goes. But I think the critical mass that we have at the moment is simply a reflection of the fact that more people are talking about geoengineering techniques. It's not in itself an indication that we have greater evidence that these techniques are actually going to do anything productive. And I think that's a very important distinction to make, to come back to your earlier question on known unknowns and unknown unknowns. We're dealing clearly with the spread here, but I think there are rather a lot more unknown unknowns than there are known. And when we talk about something as complex as planetary systems, my expertise is mainly in the area of ocean systems. I think the fact that we have greater or better models of the way in which these things will happen is sometimes misinterpreted as being filling in all of the gaps. You know, a model somehow fills in the gaps in our knowledge that we have. And of course, models will always be limited. We're dealing with systems where we're not simply going to answer all of the questions with further and further research. At some point, it needs to be a policy decision as to whether this is an appropriate way to go or not.
But you don't even think they should get started, do you?
Well, what I've said is that if there are proposals that people wish to bring forward for research into geoengineering techniques, what we need is a globally harmonised system for evaluating those to make sure that they are actually legitimate proposals and that they won't in themselves have a negative impact on the very planetary systems that they're studying. So it's not a barrier to science.
So you set that out in your evidence.
That's right.
We've read. I've just got a quick question. Do you think the British government agrees with you, or does it agree with the enthusiasts, or do you think its view is somewhere in the middle from what you know of government opinion, from the innovation or DEFRA or the new climate change department?
I think it's difficult to say. I suspect that the view is somewhere in the middle. My feeling is that from policymakers, they can see a huge scepticism and understand that scepticism around geoengineering techniques. I don't think there's a lot of appetite for them at the moment, but I think that there is a danger that the more the commercial community and to some extent the research community talks up geoengineering as a solution, some of those assumptions will begin to be set in policy that it's only a matter of time before these things will work.
My last question is, if one of these solutions, this is to Dr. Santillo again, looks viable, okay, the logic of your position is that you'll be even more opposed to it because it will look even more tempting for policymakers to shelve the action that's needed, for example, to reduce emissions because one of these is looking viable. So actually you have an interest in this not working.
No, not at all. No, I mean the position that we put forward is that at this point given the huge uncertainties and unknowns regarding even the effectiveness of some of these proposals, that at this point none of them are a